Hi class, in this video I will demonstrate how to use something called default arguments. So as we go along, first I'll write the program, then I'll explain what are default arguments and how do we use them. Okay, so here I will first write a comment here using default arguments. So here is our pound include. So here we have a program where a sale transaction might be taxed at a default 7%. You know, like a lot of places have a standard sales tax rate. So we assume that the standard sales tax rate is 7%, but some transactions are taxed at a rate other than 7%. Okay, so we will ask the user to tell us if this sale transaction is taxed at the default 7%. If the user says no, then we will basically ask the user what is the tax rate. Okay, if the user says yes, this is taxed at a default 7%, then we will not ask the user for the tax rate because the tax rate is built into the function. Right, so here I will start by creating a variable. This char variable is to get yes no from the user, yes or no. Okay. Then we need a tax rate variable to hold the tax rate, get from the user. Okay. Right, so we first ask the user, please enter the sales amount. Okay, put that in. Okay, so I'm not doing input validation here, but next one I will do. Next one is a do while loop, and here we want to let the user let us know that whether this transaction is taxed at a default tax rate, right? The user says yes or no. So we write here cout, is this transaction taxed at 7%, yes or no? And we get the user response in char variable yes no. Then we convert yes no to uppercase as we normally do. And then our test is that as long as the user keeps us giving us something other than uppercase y or n, so we write like this: if yes no not equal single quote yes, and it is also not equal uppercase n, meaning the user gave us neither y or n, gave us something weird. So we will trap the user in this case, and as long as the user keeps us giving us something other than yes capital Y or capital N, meaning y or n, doesn't matter, capital Y, the user is trapped. So once user gives us either y or n, then the user is okay. So here now we check if the user said this transaction is taxed at 7%, then we don't need to ask the user the tax rate. But if the user says this was taxed at a rate other than 7%, then the user must provide us with the tax rate. What is the tax rate it was taxed at, right? So here first one is if yes no equal capital Y. Then what we do is we make a call to a function called calc amount. So as you can see, this is not an assignment statement, so the calc amount does not return anything back. So at calc amount, send the argument for sales only. It's not the tax rate. Because why? Because tax rate will be built in the function as a default argument. Okay, then we write if yes no equal to capital, and meaning the user said no, this is not taxed at a standard 7%, this is taxed at a different rate. Then we need to find from the user what is the tax rate. So cout, please enter the tax rate as a percentage. Okay. And put that in tax rate. Once we have the tax rate from the user, now we make a function call. We write calc amount and we send sales and tax rate both. Okay, so you can it's okay to be curious at this stage as to why in this case when I call the function calc amount I did not send the tax rate, whereas in this case I'm sending the sales and the tax rate. So I'll explain just a little later, right? So this, what happens is this function returns nothing back to the main function. Basically calc amount does its job and shuts down, and the return and the control comes back to return 0. So we're pretty much done with the main function more or less. Now we need to design the function calc amount here. So we write here void, because the function returns nothing back. We write calc amount, and here we write int SAL for sales and double TR for tax rate. Okay? And then here we create a local variable amount, and we write amount equal sales amount plus sales amount times TR by 100. Because why? We got the tax rate as a percentage, we must divide by 100. Then we simply display the amount. The amount is dollar symbol variable amount and L. Okay? So I'll explain in detail what's going on, right? We're almost done with this function, just need to prototype it. Okay? And that's all we do here. And so here we need to first prototype this one right here. Come up here. Right, so that's a prototype. Okay, that's a prototype of the function. Okay, so function looks to be pretty much complete. So I'm gonna just now try and build this one and see how it goes. Okay, so we write here default arguments .cpp. Got an error. IOStream. You got another error. Calc amount sales. Oh, let me see. It says. Okay, this is a very valid argument because I did not do something that I should have done. So what I should do here is I should provide the default argument here, which is 7%. So I'm just going to make it a 7. So hopefully this should fix that error. So I'm going to rebuild it again. Now it's okay. Right, so I'm going to run this program, then I'll go back to the program and go line by line and explain what's going on here. So first we enter the sales amount. So I'm going to type 1500, right? Then is this transaction taxed at standard 7%? I will say no, lowercase. Say what is the tax rate? So now I give them, no, it's at 8.5%. So the tax rate for this one is 8.5, not the standard 7, right? And it gives me my amount in the function. Okay, but if I run this program one more time, and this time I put the same amount, enter, and I say yes, it is the standard 7%, right? And it gives me at 7%. So what's going on? So here the critical concept is we are using something called default arguments. What happens is when you define a function right here, right, we can provide default values for a parameter. In this case, the default value is for tax rate, meaning tax rate default value is 7%. Okay. You can say, why did I not put here? The reason is that the default value for the parameter, which is called a default argument, should be provided in the first instance of the function. So when is the first instance of a function, meaning when does the compiler first know about the function? It's either at the prototype in this case, or if the function is defined above the main function, then the function is the first instance, right? So the function is created below the main function, as in this case, as you can see, it is below the main function. The first instance of this function is the prototype of the function. First instance means when was the function first introduced to the compiler? It was introduced to the compiler at the prototype. So the rule is, when we provide default values for an argument, we should provide them at the first instance. So what is a default argument? A default argument means that you can provide a default, meaning a given value for one parameter or more than one parameter, as many parameters as you want, as many you got, so that if you don't pass a value for that parameter, the default value will be used, right? But if you do provide a value for that parameter, then the default value will not be used, but the provided value will be used, right? So let me start from top again and explain one more time what's happening here. So as you can see, this is a prototype, and the default value or default argument, as we call it, is provided here and not here. Why? Because it must be provided in the first instance of the function. Prototype is the first instance of a function if there's a prototype. If the function is above the main function, then there is no prototype and the function is the first instance, right? So that's how it goes. Start the main function, variable, sales, yes, no, tax rate. So we get the sales amount from the user. Then we ask the user, is this transaction taxed at 7%? The user can say yes or no. The user says yes, that this is indeed taxed at 7%. Okay. So now, as you can see, we're making the function call to the function calc amount with just one argument for sales. We did not provide the argument for tax rate, right? So you can say, hey, aren't we supposed to provide as many arguments as the number of parameters? The answer is yes, but not necessarily if one of the parameters has a default value. So here, since tax rate has a default value, you can skip passing an argument for tax rate. So what happens in this case? Because we are only providing argument for sales and not the argument for tax rate, the default value will be used. This value will be used, right? So compiler says, okay, they did not provide us any value for tax rate. So obviously I have a default value 7 basically, and I'm going to use that. Okay. In the other case, when the user says no, this transaction is not taxed at a 7%, meaning the tax rate for this transaction is different, then we must get from the user the tax rate, because 7% is not the tax rate. The user gives us a tax rate, put that in tax rate, and now as you can see, we're making the call to the same function calc amount, but this time we are providing two arguments, one for sales and one for tax rate. So what happens is, because in this case we are providing an argument for tax rate, the default value will not be used, rather the provided value will be used. Okay. So the concept of default arguments is that one or more parameters can be given default values, which are called default arguments. Okay. If you do not provide a value for that parameter, then the default value will be used, like in this case. But if you do provide a value, as we are doing here, we are setting the tax value in the variable tax rate. So default value will not be used, rather whatever is the value in the argument tax rate, that will be used, correct? So here, this is the actual function. So even though you don't see any tr equal 7, that is being read from here. You're only supposed to provide it once and in the first instance. You cannot provide it again here. If you do provide it here, it will be syntax error. So the rule of default argument is that they should be provided in the first instance of the function and not again. So here, as you can see, We have no equal 7, but it will be understood because of the prototype. So here is a local variable amount, local to the function calc amount. And this is our formula. What is the amount? Amount is equal to the sales amount. And this is the tax amount, which means sales amount times tax rate by 100. Because tax rate is being given in percentage, we must convert it to decimal by dividing by 100, right? So this total is the amount. You assign it to amount and you display the amount. Okay. One more rule you have to remember about default arguments is that they must be trailing arguments, meaning I cannot put double tr equals 7 before int sal, because int sal doesn't have any default arguments, meaning the parameter has no default value. So the rule is that the default arguments or parameters with default values must be the trailing parameters, right? Meaning after this, there should be nothing like this. For example, if I make a fake parameter here, say int say x, which has no default value, that would be wrong. Why? Because this must be the trailing parameter. So I have to, let me remove this. Okay. So keep in mind, when you create a default argument, meaning a parameter with a default value, it must be the trailing parameter. Meaning after that, either there should be no parameters, or if there is another parameter after this, that must also have a default value. Okay. So otherwise you will get a syntax error. So that's the reason I wrote sal here, because sal doesn't have any default values. It must come first, and tr has a default value, so it must come after that, meaning it's a trailing parameter. Okay. Also, the value that you provide should be either a literal or a constant, not a variable. Okay. We cannot put a variable here. We can put a literal or a constant. Okay. So let me just go over them. I have them in a Word file. If I bring up my Word file, it should be here somewhere. Here it is, right? Hope you guys can see this. So what are the default arguments in a function? I'm going to put this thing on Blackboard also. A function when created may have one or more default arguments. So you can have a default argument for each parameter, or you may have default arguments for no parameters. It's your choice. They must have specific values, either a literal or a constant. These must be the trailing arguments. There should be no parameter after that which does not has a default value. Okay, so they must be the trailing argument, the trailing parameters, and they must be provided in the first instance of a function. So if the function has a prototype, right, meaning the function was created below the main function, the default argument must be provided in the prototype, not in the function. If you provide it again in the function, it's syntax error. But if you decide to create the function above the main functions, you can do that. There's no law against it. Then there is no prototype, so the default argument should be in the function itself. Let's go back to the program. Let's bring it up. So here is our program. So one more time, one of the parameters has a default value, which means if you do not provide any argument for this parameter, the default value will be used. But if you do provide an argument for this parameter, then the provided value will be used and not the default value. Okay, so default value must be specified in the first instance of the function. So prototype is the first instance if you have a prototype, and do not again specify it in the main function, because that would be syntax error. Okay, so these are the rules of default arguments.